Hello and welcome to another episode of 10-Minute Teaching. I'm Ben Campbell and today I'm going to be teaching you how to write an essay. There are three main techniques that we want to think about when trying to write an outstanding essay. Firstly, we want to attack the question, break it down and make sure we know exactly what we're trying to do. Secondly, we want to make an effective plan that includes all the information that we're going to need to make this essay so great. And thirdly, we need to think about what we're actually going to put into the main points of our essay. Today, I'm going to go through all three of those techniques with you, one by one. Small side note, I'm going to be using an example from English literature, seeing as though that's what I teach and I'm terrible at geography. But these techniques should apply to any kind of humanities style essay that you're being asked to do. So even if you're studying history or geography or some other kind of humanities subject, this video should be helpful to you as well. All right, guys, let's jump straight into it. So the first thing that we need to do when trying to write an outstanding essay is to look at the question. We have to attack the question and really break it down into its constituent parts so that we know exactly what it is that we need to do. Without that, our argument might well lose some of the focus that we need it to have. Let's take a standard question that we might well see in something like an English exam. For instance, the question, how does Shakespeare present the character of Romeo in Romeo and Juliet? Pretty standard stuff. Each part of this question tells us something vitally important that we need to be aware of before we try and write an essay in response to this question. Let's break it apart. How is the interrogative word here, and it tells us that this essay will need to deal with processes and techniques. Well, this is different from a question that asks, say, why, which would be more concerned with something like cause and effect, or a question that begins with, how much do you agree? Within that kind of essay, we need to weigh up different points of view. Not so in this question. This question's about how something is done by a writer. Therefore, our essay needs to be about processes and techniques that this writer uses. The next phrase, presents the character, tells us what kind of processes we want to be focusing on. In this case, we're looking at processes that the writer employs to present the character of Romeo to us. So we need to be thinking about what kind of impressions we have of Romeo and what Shakespeare has done to give us those impressions. That's going to be the content of our argument. This means that we don't want to be going down the garden path and writing about other characters, obviously, because the question's about Romeo, nor do we want to be writing about anything other than exactly what Shakespeare's doing to give us certain impressions of Romeo's character. A clear and focused argument is really vital to making an outstanding essay, and by looking at the question very closely, we'll be able to understand exactly what it is that we need to reply with. In this case, then, we'll be giving a series of impressions of Romeo and explaining how Shakespeare has created those impressions using all of his writerly techniques. Getting a solid grip on what the essay question is asking us to do is absolutely vital for getting that clear argument straight in our heads. Once we've got that clear argument, that's when we can start to make our plan. Now, the specific structure of your essay might well depend on the subject that you're doing and the type of question that you've been asked. But let me give you a template which works in 99% of scenarios. This is the 5-paragraph structure, a very common structure of essay that I teach almost all of my students to use, from the lowest years up to the oldest. This consists of a short introduction, 3 main body paragraphs, and finally a conclusion. This is a template that you might well have seen before, and it's very effective at keeping your argument tightly controlled and focused on the question. Why 3 paragraphs, you might ask? Well, 2 is probably not enough to support our argument. We want to have a good range of examples and evidence. But 4 is probably too many for us to either try and write, and certainly too many for our reader to remember. 3 is the perfect number, as it is in many situations. Let's go through each of these parts in turn. So our introduction is designed to introduce the context and background of our argument, and also to provide a bit of a summary about what our 3 main ideas are going to be. So returning to our Romeo and Juliet example, in that introduction we might want to give a bit of background about who Romeo is. He's the male protagonist of the play, and he is a classic Shakespearean tragic hero. Then we'd also want to be giving the summary of what our 3 main impressions of Romeo are. Let's think of some right now. We could say that he is shallow and a little bit reckless at the beginning of the play, but ultimately he's somebody that we come to feel sympathy for, particularly towards the end of the play. 3 main ideas. We'd summarize those all in our introduction. That also gives us the 3 main ideas for our main body paragraphs. Notice that the most powerful and impactful of those points, the idea that by the end of the play we really become to feel sympathetic for Romeo, is the one that I leave until the end of my main body paragraphs. That's going to be my last main point. And that's exactly what you should be doing in your plan as well. Leave whichever is the most impactful and the most compelling argument until last, because that's the one that we really want to end on to give the greatest impression to our reader. Finally, we have our conclusion. This acts as sort of a mirror to your introduction. We want to also summarize again the main ideas that we came up with in our main body paragraphs, but we also want to focus on the journey that we've taken the reader on and the argument that we've ultimately come to try to give them. In the case of the Romeo and Juliet example, although I talked initially about how he was a character that we didn't really get on with, by the end of the essay, I'm really going to try and make my reader believe that Romeo is a character that we feel sympathy for. So in my conclusion, I'd really focus on that idea that we've come from thinking of Romeo as someone who we don't so much like as a character to someone that we really do sympathize with by the end of the play. And that's it. That's our 5-paragraph plan, set and ready to go. There's not a lot of detail in our plan just yet, but that's fine. We can work on that in the next section. Now, this is really important. Don't skip the plan section. Many of my students feel like they can probably just get away without a plan. Sure, you can just skip to the essay, right? Make it up as you go along. I'd really advise against that. That's like getting in a car, deciding you're going to drive somewhere and not bringing a map or even a phone. You're going to get lost, sadly. So that's the same case for the essay writing system. You've got to have a plan if you want to be able to make sure that you're going to go where it is that you want to go in your argument. Once we have our plan, though, what do we put into our main body paragraphs? Let's talk about that next. So we've got our plan, and now we want to start writing our main body paragraphs. But what do we do? What do we actually put into those paragraphs? Let's talk about that right now. So in each of these 3 main body paragraphs, we want to be giving focused, relevant evidence and examples that prove the point that we're trying to make in that given paragraph. Let's go back to our current example about Romeo. We need to provide evidence from the play that supports these impressions that we're saying we have of Romeo. And these examples need to focus on techniques and processes that Shakespeare has done to create these impressions. Remember that we're not just giving impressions randomly, we're discussing how Shakespeare has created those impressions in the play. Let's take that first point, that he's a shallow character. How could we prove that? How could we support that by looking at the play? Well, Shakespeare decides to tell us that before Romeo fell in love with Juliet, he was actually madly in love with a completely different girl that ended very abruptly. The writer's technique here, his choice of the plot line, helps to create this impression we have that he's a shallow character. He was madly in love with one girl, and then he randomly becomes madly in love with another girl. We're therefore led to believe that his love for Juliet is maybe not all that genuine. Then we just need to keep adding further evidence and further examples to the point until we feel that it is securely supported, that we've proven that the point is true. Then we might move on to our next point, the idea that he's reckless. Again, we want to give examples and evidence from the text about things Shakespeare has done to show us that. For instance, Romeo gate crashes a party that's being held by a rival family. As we're going along these main points, we want to give a sense that our argument is developing, that it's getting more and more complex and compelling as it goes on. Like in our plan, as we decided we were going to ultimately come to decide that we feel sympathy for Romeo, something which is not the case maybe at the beginning of the play. Doing this gives the impression to our reader that our argument is going somewhere. We're taking them on a journey, showing them something, and then something which adds to that, and then something which adds on to that again. By the time they've finished our essay, they should be leaving feeling that they've really learned something interesting and compelling about the thing that we're talking about. So, in this video, we discussed the importance of breaking down the question and making sure you know exactly what it is that you need to do in your argument. Using the template of the 5-paragraph structure to organize all of your ideas, and then making sure that you include focused, logical evidence that supports the argument that you're trying to make. We focused on an English question for an example, but this should be able to be applied to any humanities subject that you're doing, whether that's history, geography, or any other similar subject. In fact, the template of the 5-paragraph structure can be used in many different scenarios. For instance, it's used in this video. introduction, 3 main points, and right now we're in the conclusion. This 5-paragraph template can be very useful for all sorts of different argumentative and rhetorical structures that you're trying to use. So hopefully it'll be helpful for you the next time that you need to make some kind of argument. And that is how to write an essay in under 10 minutes. Hopefully you enjoyed that, guys. If you have more things that you'd like me to teach you in less than 10 minutes, put them in the comment section below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.